Welcome to The Call to Create. I'm Betsy Bush. I'm so excited to have Dan Moretti with me today because he's one of the inspirations for this podcast. Dan is a lawyer in New York. He's also writing one-act plays that have been workshopped with professional actors. I've seen them and they were both great. Dan, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Betsy. Appreciate it.
When I think about lawyers writing, I think about Scott Turow and writing the courtroom dramas and the thrillers and that sort of thing. But playwriting is a different animal. And I want to find out how you started writing one-act plays.
Well, it actually goes back. It's funny you mentioned Scott Turow because I read Presumed Innocent, I think sometime in the late 80s. And at the time, I just thought it was wonderful. And that got me to write in the 90s a novel, a courtroom drama, which took a few years to do, given that I was practicing law at the same time. But it never got published, but it did meet with some limited success in some contests and things like that.
And you had an agent or two shopping it around?
I was really fortunate because I sent it to I believe it was the Key West Ernest Hemingway first novel contest back in the 90s. And it got the runner-up prize. To my surprise.
That's amazing.
And thank you. And if you came in the top one or two slots, the festival got you an agent, a New York agent. So I was able to get an agent. I had dinner with her. She liked the manuscript. And that, unfortunately, is sort of as far as it went. There were a lot of publishers that looked at the manuscript and decided they liked it, but they passed on it. And I was sort of one of those writers that, I could probably have covered a little part of my wall with about 10 or 15 letters saying thank you, but no thank you. And so that is sort of the first creative steps that I had taken. And then after that, after the 90s and going for many years after that, sort of creative writing went pretty much on hold for me while I was, practicing law and raising a family.
Practicing law is a career, very busy, full career in itself.
Yes, it was. But I always would write and jot things down here or there, and I always enjoyed doing it and had hopes that at some point I would sort of reactivate that skill that I think I had and got better at over the years.
But playwriting tell me, do you have a theater? Are you a theater nerd? Are you what got you interested? Did you have an early interest in theater? How did that happen?
I think part of it is maybe genetics, because my father, who had been an assistant principal of a school for 30 years, when he retired in his mid-60s, I had all of a sudden got a call from him or my mom telling me that he was in the Greenville Community Theater and was going to be in 12 Angry Men.
Oh.
And so my dad seemed to have found theater after he retired. For a number of years, I saw him in many plays. And so sometimes I think some of it just sort of, it might be in the DNA.
Right. 12 Angry Men is a classic
yes.
courtroom drama, right?
I guess so, yes. And he was one of the main actors in it. He was great.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So and my mom also, she was a writer. Didn't publish very much, but she liked to write in free time. And my playwriting actually started with the pandemic.
Yeah. A lot of us had time on our hands,
exactly.
Homebound. Yeah.
Exactly. Sort of what I did, my law practice got very quiet, as many people's practices and jobs did during the pandemic in your home. And so I started writing my first one-act play that got read in sometime after the pandemic, but that's really how I got started doing it.
how do your ideas for plots come, characters? How do you go about structuring a play?
Well, my ideas come from typically something that I read about, something that interests me in the news or from talking to other people. And the first play that I wrote was really, it was about the relationship between humans and dogs.
Oh.
And it sort of caught my attention because during the pandemic, because it was so isolating, dogs were being adopted around this country in the tens of thousands. Right. And I became interested in why that was happening. And so I was going to write some sort of article on it. I was just because it piqued my interest, but I decided, why not write a play? And so the first play that I wrote was called Ice Age Hunters, and it was really about a sort of an archaeologist with some personal issues who was isolating during the pandemic and was visited, surprisingly, by a reporter from a dog magazine who had learned that this archaeologist was one of the discoverers of a find in which Ice Age hunters their bone fragments had been found to have been buried with their dogs. Oh. And she was visiting him. She wanted to know why. And so I wrote a play on that. That was the first play that I wrote, called Ice Age Hunters. And it got read in a theater group in New York by professional actors. And it was really exciting. It was fun. That was my first foray into playwriting.
So that's, okay. So that's, I mean, it's easy to imagine where dogs almost become, they're almost children for some people, yes, or, partners. There's a real emotional connection. That's wonderful. I would love to see that if it's ever, staged, right?
Well, at some point, maybe. But it was, again, just as my first foray into this field, mm-hmm, it was just very exciting to have a play or something you've written just, acted out by extremely skilled actors who liked the script and said, sure, let's do a rehearsal or two and I'll read it. And it was a lot of fun. And so that's sort of where the playwriting started.
Okay, so now you've had two other plays, one acts, staged with equity actors, which, yes, is very impressive. And they both, if I can say this, seem to pull a little bit from your personal experience. Now, you are also a dog owner, I think, right?
Of course.
So we could see where that first thing came from. But the play that I first saw of yours was called The Groomer, yeah, and it takes place. It draws on your law career, but it's not a courtroom drama per se. It's kind of a back office sort of mediation,
exactly,
situation that is not something that members of the public generally see.
Yeah,
right. It's like, this is a lot of the law kind of takes place where there are, I don't want to say backroom deals, but it's a mediation sort of thing where a retired judge is trying to bring two different parties to an agreement.
Yeah, having done a lot of mediations, I came to the subject with some background and some experience. But really the idea for The Groomer came from just the news. I was reading the news and I saw at some point Florida had passed a law called the Don't Say Gay law, which was, I guess, at the time prohibited teachers. I think the law has since changed, but prohibited teachers from talking about certain subjects. And so it made me sort of think about, how a young, inexperienced science teacher of sixth graders would, how she would handle a situation where she did mention some things about being an atheist or being gay, and not intentionally, but really drawn to say that by a lot of questions from her students. and then having some very upset parents file a lawsuit. And sort of the point of the play, or at least the theme of it, was how a mediator would try to deal with the two sides who clearly were at odds with each other, and how the mediator himself was dealing with his own problems, which was also part of that play. So it worked out, and I was really psyched. It got selected by the Emerging Artists Theater Festival in New York for production. So that was cool.
I thought it was really wonderful the way you all the characters were really well rounded, and the judge especially, who's trying to bring everything together, and then you realize as he talks to someone who knew him way back when, that I hope I'm not spoiling, his wife has passed away, and he's deep in grief.
Yeah.
And so he's dealing with this as well. And I just thought the characters were so well structured, and they were fully formed, and how a playwright has to leave, at least this is the way I see it, has to leave little crumbs. But you don't want to give everything away. People need to infer and do their own interpretation about what's going on.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the mediator in this case, whose job really is to do every day, is to go in and try to get these parties, these litigants, to put their problems behind them, settle, and move on. Whereas in the play that I wrote, this mediator himself has not gotten past anything in his own life. And so I thought that made the character more interesting. And to just follow on your other point is, absolutely, when you're writing these plays, one of the worst things you can do, biggest mistake you can make, is to make them predictable. I mean, the audience, if they think know the outcome when the play starts, it's not going anywhere.
Right,
so what you try to do is make the plays unpredictable, and little snippets of the story start being dropped in as the play evolves. And so you want to, again, I appreciate your compliment. I want to try to make these stories unpredictable for the viewers.
So how did you know that? How did you know to do that? Is that just instinctive, or did somewhere along the way it's like, oh yeah, this is how you do it, right?
It is. You sort of learn by doing, and I've had a lot of friends who have been just really terrific, who are, one or two of them are professional editors, and some of them just like to read things that I write and will have comments about it. But I have seen some instructional courses on the web about playwrights saying, don't ever write a play in which the outcome is predictable. That is a no-no. And so, it's a little bit of learning something off the web from some instructional things, but most of it is just by writing something and having someone just constructively tell you, come on, this is not grabbing me, this is not suspenseful, and here's some suggestions.
So when you wrote something like The Groomer, did you get to the end point that you had in mind, but kind of went kind of took a circuitous way to get there? Or did you end up at a point that you did not yourself expect?
Let me answer that by saying, as a trial lawyer, and I've tried a lot of cases, I have been trained, and I train other people, to write your summation first. This is where you want to get to. This is the point. And I found, just for efficiency's sake, I try to know where I'm going when I start. This is the point I want to make, and this is how I'm going to end this. Now, that's not to say that the ending changes as you develop the characters more and more. The ending will morph somewhat, but I have found that when you have time limits on your free time and leisure time to write, you save an enormous amount of time. I don't mean funny. I'm looking back to times I wrote things where I had no idea where I was going, and what a mistake that was. I'm really talking about sort of almost like when in my days when I was trying a lot of cases. These are the points I want to make, and here's the way I'm going to get there, and that's sort of the way I write the plays.
That's great. That is great advice for anyone who wants to write a play or maybe even a novel, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, you don't want to, because I think a lot of times, and I've done a little bit of writing on my own, nothing that's been published, but sometimes you start
Yeah.
and you find yourself like, wow, where did this come from? And wow, this is going in a totally different direction than I had, but I like the direction it's going in. And so which way do I go? Do I
Yes.
go with this new direction, or do I stick with the original?
It definitely happens when I've written things where the direction changes somewhat. But again, it just makes it so much easier when you're writing creatively, at least for me, to understand that this is where this character is going to wind up. And so it's been, it's just really through practice and training that you sort of get there.
Very cool. Now, the second one that you did, that at least the second one that was staged,
Yeah.
had to do with a young diver, an athlete, college-level athlete. She's a diver, and she dives for a university in Texas, and she tells her family that she wants to transfer to a college in California without really any real obvious reason. And this is shortly after returning from a surprise trip to New York.
Yes.
And there is a lot of, again, this is all the audience has to infer the situation. The mother picks up what's happened. The father seems to be completely clueless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He starts clueless at the end and ends clueless. Poor guy.
Poor guy, right?
Right.
It's called Ascension Day.
Yeah.
And I have to ask you, and I hope I'm not spoiling this for folks, I have to ask you, how did you find, who was it? Is it the young woman who says, this is Ascension Day?
Yeah.
And on it, and Mussolini
Right.
announced on Ascension Day that he wanted all women,
Yeah.
all wives to have as many children as possible, or something like that.
And they would be financially rewarded for that. Yeah.
Right. And how did you find that detail?
This was just really, I actually stumbled on it, and we were on vacation, my wife and I, and she was out swimming laps, and I knew that there was going to be a heavy theme in this play that was pretty much written. A lot of it had already been done about authoritarianism and control over women. And I had already had I already had sort of the main plot there, and that this was an Italian family, that the great-grandmother had emigrated to the United States in the 1920s. And I was trying to actually look for tying my points in to something Mussolini had done. And I could not believe how I just stumbled on this Ascension Day speech, which really wasn't too hard to find, but it was a speech that Mussolini gave in Rome on Ascension Day in 1927. And it really went on forever. It was a very, very long speech, but a small portion of it, which really became very, very highly publicized around the world in 1927, was his statement about, women should have many, many babies. And then right after that, he started banning birth control and imposing taxes on childless marriages, and started doing things like that in the regime. But,
wow.
But
I think that it was a big surprise to a lot of people that this was actually, that actually happened, right?
Well, yeah. There are, it started, I think, with that Ascension Day speech, and it just happened that my protagonist of the play was a state champion platform diver, and I really, it sort of came together when I found that.
That was awesome. An awesome detail and just
Thank you.
really great writing.
Thank you.
And tying all of that in. Do you use a lot of details that you've kind of gathered from your own life? I mean, your son is a college level diver.
Yes.
When he was in college, a very accomplished diver.
Yeah.
Did you learn something about the culture of college sports and the coach
Oh,
swimmer
definitely.
relationship?
Definitely. And when the play was read and had a reading last year, the year before, I forget when it was, but there were some questions from the group of playwrights that I'm in about some things like that, about the specifics about the sport of diving and whether the coach himself would typically inject himself or herself into the dynamics of the family, almost intimately. And it was so funny because when I had the reading, a couple people raised their hands who had been very serious Division I athletes, and they said this is absolutely the relationship that coaches have with their premier athletes at this level. And they will come to the house and they will talk to the parents and they will talk about a lot of these things. So much goes on, in connection with these athletes. I tried to make it as realistic as possible, given my own experience with the divers.
Well, the other thing is the daughter, who I think from our conversation here, anyone would be able to pick up that the daughter went to New York to have an abortion. But she can't say it out loud in Texas because she could go to jail, or someone who might have helped her get to New York. Could also be there's suddenly and here is a very promising athlete now having to make this huge life decision.
Right.
It seemed very timely, and I think it hit a lot of us like a ton of bricks. Like, this could be a very real situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the Groomer, where the Florida law got passed, and then I started trying to figure out, well, how would this actually operate, for this young, experienced teacher who does say some things unintentionally in the classroom, and how that sort of turns into a real mess.
Which happens when you're in a teacher in a classroom, and all sorts of things get said unintentionally.
Yes, and you'll have 11-year-old kids drawing you out. I mean, they're real good at it, and certainly I was when I was in sixth grade. But as the Ascension Day, I wrote it sometime after the Dobbs decision came down, which overturned Roe versus Wade, and then those very, very significant laws got passed in a number of states. And so what I tried to think about and write about was, well, let's take the Texas State diving champion, who is America's best hope for beating the Chinese at the Olympic Games. There's no one better. And everyone's banking on her to possibly win a gold medal. And 4 months before the Olympic trials, she finds out she's pregnant. And there's not going to be another Olympics for 4 years. And diving, like gymnastics and some other sports of that type, there's a shelf life there. There's not a long time that people have to really do their best at those sports. They just demand too much of you, of what you can do physically. And so I thought, let's take this person and put her in that situation with a very conservative Italian Catholic family, and let's see how that all works out. And so that's sort of how that play got written.
Incredible. I'm agog. I mean, honestly, this is amazing. You mentioned you had do you have a group that you work with? Do you have a little playwriting group and you read each other's works, or how does it work?
Yeah, I was so fortunate during the pandemic. I wrote this play about this archaeologist who was, dealing with a lot of issues, and it translated into something having to do with Paleolithic Ice Age hunters and the relationship with dogs. This 30,000-year-old relationship that I wanted to explore. And I wrote it, maybe 35 pages, just a pretty straightforward one act. And I showed it to a friend of mine. Again, this was during the pandemic, and he said, I know a playwrights group that I think would be very interested in reading this. And I was very nervous about it because all writers, especially ones that are getting started, are very, very nervous about people reading their stuff and what they think is. I'm as sensitive as anybody else about that stuff. And I said, okay. And so it went to the head of the playwrights organization, and she called me and she said, we're going to read this, and we're going to get professional actors, and we're going to get you a professional director, and this is all going to be done. And I was like, really? And she said, yeah, and I'll draft the logo. And I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
And she was calling me and sending me the bios of the professional actors that were going to read the parts, and they just took it from there. And I was, and then next thing I knew, I'm watching my play being read by these wonderfully talented actors with this wonderful director who loved dogs. I mean, that's why he said he said, I love dogs. I'll direct this. And it's very thrilling, for that first time sitting in a room with other playwrights, and of course an audience. My family was there, other people are there in New York City, and they're reading the play and acting it. It's staged. They may have a script. They're on book. They're not off book. They actually have a script, but they are actually doing the performance, and it's really, really exciting. And that sort of, after that happened, I said, wait a minute, maybe I should write some more of these.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So there is this whole kind of community, a theater community in New York City where you have workshops and festival workshops, and you've had two, in addition to what you've just described, the two plays we've been talking about, staged, actually directed and
produced.
And how does that happen? How do you get into that?
Well, it starts with entering a play into various festivals. The Emerging Artist Theater Festival is a wonderful festival that runs a couple of times a year. And I think they're pretty selective. And I was really fortunate that, they wrote back when I sent them the Groomer, and they said, we're on. We're going to sell tickets to your play. We're going to give you a theater. We're going to market your play. We're going to have a light director. We're going to do all these things for you.
Wow.
And so it really, it sort of took off from there. And it's a little nerve-wracking because I'd never done this before, and there are no understudies, of course. So you worry about the actors and, is someone going to get sick? Is someone going to get COVID? Is someone going to fall off their bike? Is the show going to go on?
Yeah.
So to speak. But
welcome
knock on
to the
wood,
theater.
It ended up, they went off beautifully, and, it worked. And there is a very nice community in New York City that I found in my limited experience of these actors, directors, production people, stage managers who are all over New York City and, looking to work on, big projects, small projects, keeping busy, and are across the board incredibly supportive. I mean, really, of writers.
That's great. And the people who have been working on your plays have been on Broadway.
Yes.
And that's not something you would expect.
I did not expect that. I did not expect it. And when the guy called me who'd been in Phantom for 20 years on Broadway, said, I really like your script. I'd like to play this part. It's very thrilling.
That is amazing. As someone who's, working on your craft, do you go to the theater a lot? Do you see a lot of plays, or how do you, kind of keep abreast of what's going on, or, hone your craft?
I would say that it's sort of changed a bit from seeing shows on Broadway to, it sort of transitioned a little bit to going to one acts. In the last few weeks, I've seen 3 one-act plays. instead of going home from work, I'll just go to one of these theaters, usually on the Upper West Side or Midtown, and watch a 1-hour play just to see what other people are writing. And sometimes I will know the playwright, or I'll know the director, or someone I've met in my circles. And it's not Broadway. But very interesting characters and ideas are out there that you won't see on TV and not necessarily see in the movies. They're different subjects.
Interesting. So do you see yourself expanding to a 2-act play, or I don't know, I saw a play the other night where it was basically a 90-minute no intermission play. Yep. Which I think maybe that's becoming more and more common, because you just want to, once you get going, there's not a place where you want to start and stop, and then you have to start up on the second act again.
Right. One of my rules is about writing, which is something I learned from music many, many years ago when I used to play a lot and write music, which is something that I did in college and graduate school. Don't ever break the groove. And just keep it going. And build, and that's something I don't ever want to hear, that someone was bored during something that I wrote. And so, but to answer your question, I would like to write longer plays when my time permits, and there's certainly a more substantial market for a full-length play. It doesn't necessarily have to be 2 acts or 3 acts, but these full-length plays, there's much more demand for them, and the market for 1-act plays it's not that broad. Luckily, I'm in New York City, where there are people that will come and see these shows, and there's a market for it, but it's limited.
Do you have words of encouragement for people who are listening and saying, wow, that sounds like fun, I'd love to do that, write a play, a 1-act play? I don't know, maybe a movie script might be a little different, but theater, let's stick with like live theater. Do you have any suggestions for someone who's like, I want to do that?
I think that a lot of people, more than you and I could even imagine, have a voice. And they have very important things to say. And there are many ways of doing that. Writing theater, writing plays is one of those. And that to the extent people want to convey a message, or think they have something important for other people to hear, writing plays is a good way to do that. And to at least impact a limited number of people, but those things matter. And I always like with these 1-act plays the messages that they're good messages, and they're important messages, and there's not in my view, not a lot of other sources where you're able to get that in terms of entertainment. And so I always encourage people now, given my experiences, if you have something to say, by all means, start writing something, a play, a novel, even a movie script. Those things obviously take a lot more time and are much more involved. A full-length play or a movie script.
Right. What does success look like to you now, and does it look different than it might have looked 30 or 40 years ago?
What success means to me now, I honestly feel like I've achieved it. The idea that 2 plays that I've written got produced in New York with professional actors and directors, and that's something beyond which I imagined. I never thought anything would go to Broadway. I'm not sure the subject matter that I like to write about necessarily would translate to Broadway or maybe a broader audience. But I feel like that in of itself is a nice level of success. It's very comfortable, and I'd like to when I retire, I'd like to do some more of it, and see where it leads. because you never know.
You never know. And I think, what you've done now, it's like, who would have guessed that this would happen? So, I think it's something for everyone to, take a look at what you like to do and find a way to start doing it.
Yes.
You found resources online that kind of helped you along at a certain point. I think there's so many different ways you can start to do something. And even if you're not in New York, maybe you can find a writers group where you live, or something maybe around a local college or university. There might be something.
They are out there and usually very welcoming and encouraging. And, one other thing that I think is very helpful and encouraging that future playwrights should recognize from my little world in this sphere of playwriting that I'm in. The actors and the directors and the stage managers, they're all out to have fun. They're doing something that they're passionate about because they're not getting paid very much, sometimes if anything. And they love what they do. And for me, having been a lawyer for 40 years and practicing law, I'm dealing with people's problems. And frequently the people I'm dealing with are not having fun. Mm-hmm. They don't want to deal with me, and they don't want to deal with their cases and their issues that we're trying to solve and get worked through, which is what lawyers do. You transfer over to the theater world, you are introduced to, at least again, I'm relating my own experience. You are introduced to a lot of people that just are out having fun. The rehearsals that went on for a number of days of my two plays were some of the most fun times I've ever had. They are just laughing. If they miss lines, they're cracking up. They're just all having a good time. And it was an interesting contrast for me to the world that I'm typically been used to professionally, to then going into the theater world. It was, and I hope will continue to be a lot of fun.
No, and I think that's a great message for people who are maybe looking at retirement and not being really sure what that's going to look like, that it could look a lot better than your working life, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so we're going to try a lightning round.
Sure.
Okay, so what is your favorite play or playwright?
I have so many plays. I'm going to go with something that sort of unusual as to plays, but I loved the play A Few Good Men, which was written by Aaron Sorkin, who I was in high school with at Scarsdale High School.
Is that right?
Yes.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I always wanted to talk to him and say, how did you write this play just a few years after college? Which, was one of those plays that, became a great movie,
a
wonderful movie. But
and it has an iconic line, right? You can't handle the truth.
You can't handle the truth. And I look back and I said that was one play where I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. And I know I might say Shakespeare. I've seen a lot of Shakespearean plays. I've seen a lot of traditional world-renowned playwrights. I just always go back to that play, and I said I was really mad when there was an intermission. Why would you stop this play? It is so exciting.
Interesting.
And so I really love the play. Yeah.
We saw a production of that performed by inmates at Sing Sing through the Theater Arts Organization.
Wow.
It was, talk about powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to see the arts really bringing something to the people inside, and they're giving us something back. It was, plus you went to Sing Sing, which was also
unbelievable.
Yeah, well, that might be something you're familiar with, what that's like to do. So, yeah, great choice. Great choice. What actor, living or dead, would you like to appear in one of your plays?
I would really like Humphrey Bogart to appear in one of my plays. I still love his movies, And I just don't think anyone has been able to touch him in terms of the characters how he has played the characters in the films I've seen him in. So he would probably be pretty high up on my list.
You know, if you haven't seen Casablanca recently, I think it's the most perfect movie. Every line is perfect. Every shot is perfect. Every actor is perfect. So yeah,
Mary and my wife and I will watch the movie at least once a year, sometimes more, because it is timeless and it is so tightly written and so perfectly acted. And as you said, every line is it's just really, really great. Yeah.
Not to mention iconic, you know.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, right. Shocked to find there's gambling here, right?
Exactly.
Or, special friends somewhere,
round up the usual suspects.
That's it. No, absolutely. Now that's inspiring, right? For a playwright, it's like, how do you come up with lines like that?
How do you do that? And, how do you do that? And how do you write dialogue? And it comes with a lot of practice, and there's different ways that, you get there.
Which playwright, living or dead, would you like to share a drink with at your favorite pub or bar?
Is Shakespeare around?
I'm sure he'd love to, get a tanker of ale or something.
Talk about Romeo and Juliet, and we could go through the whole list. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. There's so many good ones. And as I said before, there are a lot of really, really talented playwrights out there that no one has heard of, that I'm starting to see their work in these very small theater settings on the Upper West Side or in Midtown or downtown. And they're coming up with these really, really good ideas and very interesting plays anyway, it's just a long way. There's just a lot of talent out there, and those playwrights are very much approachable. And I've talked to many of them, and we'll go back and forth on a particular idea. And so, again, it's nice to be in New York and have that access.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
Yes, it is. Dan Moretti, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Betsy. I'm really honored to be here. It was a lot of fun.
This is great. Thank you. Hey, loyal listeners. I hope you've enjoyed the first 6 episodes of The Call to Create, the podcast for all late-blooming creators out there. If you like what you've heard so far, I'd so appreciate it if you would follow or subscribe to the show, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up. And if you have begun a creative journey or know someone who has, I'd love to hear from you. Please contact me through the website, www.call2createpodcast.com. That's call to, numeral 2, create podcast.com. Thank you so much.